For me, the oral, the word is the word of many different voices in American life, and I try and frame them on the radio program. So I get in a conversation, they call it the verbal arts. So there's a narrative, but it's not exactly the idea of writing a poetry or a novel or nonfiction. On the other side of it, I would argue that a lot of what we do is using music to sequence meaning as well, segues. So I thought I'd play you some things that I think have narrative qualities and tell stories without maybe doing it in so many words. Starting with our show theme. Anyone know what this tune is? Check your New Orleans cultural literacy here. He's played it. No, it's not. It's Tipitina. Thank you. Tipitina, give it a listen. All the cultural history of New Orleans and the Gulf South is embedded in this 1 minute of music. Blues progression, jazz influence from European classical a la Louis Moreau-Gottschalk to Jelly Roll Morton, the early great piano professor. Improvisation, rhythm and blues from African Americans, and the highly individual, eccentric ability of one piano professor who works against the cultural totality, the Creole totality of New Orleans. I think it makes a good introduction. But I don't have to say any of that stuff when I'm doing it on the radio, because the music says it for me. And if you listen to the show on a regular basis, you hear those kinds of elements all the time. And little by little, you as a listener come to say, oh, I think I understand that theme and why that theme is there. I mean, I teach a whole course called Creoles and Cultural Creolization at Tulane, and I won't say it's just a gigantic footnote for American roots, but there are lots of levels of depth you can go to, and effectively, this is a quick way to get into all these kinds of things. I want to tell you that while I might use that all the time to say it's time for American roots, when certain special things and sad things and grave things happen in the social order, we can also do something like this. Same song, played in a minor key. Alan Toussaint, by the way, playing, the great New Orleans songwriter, pianist, producer, R&B hero. He calls this Tipitina and Me. And we use this minor key version of Tipitina, played a little bit more lentement, a little slower, a little less improvisatory. In our show right after Katrina, when we had been chased out of town, we managed to get on the air in time to do our first post-Katrina show. And we played this. I got 1,000 emails saying, what is that? A way to visualize 80% of one of the great cities of the world underwater. Tops of shotgun house roofs, buildings turned catty corner, people using mattresses to get to the Superdome. All the images that got into the press encapsulated by music with a kind of darkness and yet some luminosity under it, a sort of a little pinpricks of hope and light coming through, I think. The day we recorded the show thing with Alan Toussaint, he just played that off to one side, and so we happened to have it. We didn't get it because we knew we would be presenting the show during a time of national disaster. Only other time we used it was after 9/11. But that's a quick way to say we are in a different place, a different mood here, and not have to say any more about it, but play the music. And I think that's something I did actually learn at WXPN, is to just listen very closely to the music, to the words, talk to the artists, find out about the cultural setting that produced the people. And right after I had graduated, I had this vision I would do a show called American Roots. Back then, I wanted it to be American ROOTS. My world was much more based on the world of the anthropology department and the Back to the Land hippie movement and having gone to Earth Day in Fairmount Park in 1970 and all those things that were happening. And my image was a more organic idea of a linear sort of growth of people and cultures, from France, from Europe, from England, from Africa, from the Caribbean, all carrying sort of old culture and keeping culture as a tradition. I'd been involved in the folklore department Years later, when I started to work on this show, I said, I think I need the homonym, R-O-U-T-E-S, because I began to learn as I did interviews with people like Ray Charles and people who had left Louisiana and gone to Oakland, California to play Zydeco music, and rural Creoles that I recorded doing my field work in Zydeco music who were playing a song called Du Pas de Granny, Granny's Two-Step, the theme from the Beverly Hillbillies, on an accordion and a fiddle, that modernity was everywhere, and that people were coping with and creating with modernity. And in fact, people's ability to take their received traditions and turn them into something new. A Ray Charles who could take blues, gospel, jazz, and create soul, that was an amazing turn. That was a personal turn. That was a personal journey. That's not to say there weren't other great ones who did it, but only certain artists did those syntheses beyond the communities that they were raised into in the ROOTS sense of one community, one language, one landscape, one identifier. And so we began to see in the 20th century, especially this notion of ROUTES, and now it's almost becoming a commonplace in the world of anthropology, that cultures have collided and created and made new forms out of old parts. When I was taught anthropology in the old school at the museum under archaeology rubric, they was always looking for a culture area, this period, this time, this place, this. They didn't really work the boundaries. They didn't work the realities of all the crossing over of culture. But now we see that. Now we see that human beings share in profound ways as much as maybe distinguishes them. Pluribus and unum, it's an old question in American life. And it intrigued me right up to when I made the program. When I was a student, I really, really grappled with what was America. Well, it's not just the people at this university. It's not just the people in my little New England hometown. It's all kinds of people and cultures. And how do we understand our unity and what it is that keeps us separate and distinct? And of course, we fought a lot of battles in this country over just that. I happen to think we're in a better place than we used to be. In any case, I called it ROUTES, and then I found interviewing Dolly Parton. She said, I say routes. Yes. In the Mid-South, people do say that, and we have certain designations where people say that, certain cities in the Midwest. She says, when I say roots, I'm talking about my visit to the hairdresser. She was messing with me. She's a great lady, and I was very impressed talking to her about her sense of the love of the hometown and the mountains and how wonderful it was. And I said, well, it was so wonderful. Why did you leave it and go out to the bright lights, Dolly? She said, that is a very good question. And she really talked a lot about the creative tension between being a big personality in a small town who still loved the old ballads and loved her family, but had to be out in another place to exercise her talents. ROUTES, out. But it's ROOTS that took her back to doing the work she does now and making bluegrass albums and not needing Nashville backing in her soundscapes anymore. So in these people, you get a sense of the 20th century and the movement of people and culture, and that's one of the things that I like to do with the program.